welcome. Yes, and I will turn this microphone on for you, and I hope it works.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming today. Sarah and I met you at the open house you had at the Women's Rural Resource Center. We were trying to remember while we're coming here, was it in September of last year or earlier?
I don't know.
And that will summarize everything that we are about to talk about. We're going to talk about the Women's Rural Resource Center and the work that you and your staff do there. Before we do, you've been the executive director there for, I feel like it's going on your third year now.
2 years in July.
2 years in July, yes. And I'm sure you have lots of stories to tell us about the work that happens and its impact on you. So I have some questions that we've talked about already, but put them on the board so we can remember. Before we get to talking about what happens at the Women's Resource Center, as the executive director, you have a big role to play there. So the question is, what motivates you? What's driving you to do the work that has you going, I don't even remember when I started? What's your motivation?
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. And when I say I don't know when the donor open house was, because all I remember was the community. You just remember the day, you remember the vibe, you remember who was there.
And the barbecue.
And the barbecue, which my lovely son and his partner came and volunteered that day to provide the food, so that was lovely. What motivated me? It's interesting. I was reflecting on what you were sharing this morning thus far. And I think sometimes you're called to do something from a young age, and you just kind of know that that's what you're meant to do. And using my voice in leadership was part of that. And I found myself in leadership roles right from little. I used to go to church with my grandmother every Sunday when I was with her. And I remember I used to sit beside the same woman each time because she had the candies in her purse. And so I knew if I sat in that pew that she would eventually slide me over the candy while I was waiting. But then I became to a point where I was like, wait, all the other kids need to have candies too. So I was advocating within the pews to say, you should bring more candies because there's like 20 of us. And we should all have the candies. And eventually she was. And so that's a small glimpse into that piece of using your voice to advocate to ensure that everybody's getting a piece of something that you're receiving that feels good.
Even as a child,
yes.
When you're receiving gifts, there's that sense of what does equity mean?
Yes.
And am I motivated? Do I have a voice to say something about it?
Yeah.
Before we go too deeply in that, there are grandmothers here who know what it means to bring their grandchildren. I have no clue whether or not anyone is sliding candy over across the pew. I've never had access to any of that candy.
I'm lucky then.
But so what motivated you? Your grandmother is part of that story.
Yeah, our family.
A community is part of that story, but then also something about your spirit.
And I think that's seeing the injustice. So I'm Anishinaabe, I'm from Kettle and Stony Point First Nation. And so growing up in community, but also growing up in Sarnia and surrounding areas, and then coming to London, my mother got breast cancer and passed away at 47. And so for many, many years, I witnessed what divide looked like, what not coming together looked like, where all I saw was people and different walks of life. Like I said, growing up and going to church with my grandmother, but also understanding culture and watching my family weave these two things together to be able to bring what everybody needed in that moment. And so I think in growing up the way that I did, and just seeing the world in a clear view, you see that there's a lot of injustice. You try and figure out what justice is as a little person, and then moving on up. Even to this point, I meet people that are in their later years of life, and they're like, what is justice and what does that mean? And so I was always trying to raise the voice to be able to bring people together, but also to call it what isn't right, but then not to come at in a way of unkindness. Kindness has always been a first law of my own, and leading from a place of love. And so I think that was the ticket to opening people up to the injustices, to then come together to help with healing.
We've been talking for a number of months about what are the ways we can serve God, and an important part of that, discerning how to serve God, is about hearing that sense of call. How can I serve? Which is both that inner voice and also seeing where there's a need.
And having humility with that, right? To have humility to understand that we are all in different walks. We've all experienced different things, but everyone deserves the same form of kindness, equity, justice, these sorts of things. And I work tirelessly to bring people together to be a bridge, but also to reconcile worlds and people and spaces.
Well, let's talk then about what a Women's Rural Resource Center does. We had originally planned to have the sermon interview closer to December. Advent, when we as a congregation have our annual drive like so many other congregations do. But I was thinking, I think it turned out really well that we're not doing it in the lead up to Christmas, because you probably wouldn't say it out loud, but I'll say it out loud. Everybody tends to give leading up to Christmas, but what about through the rest of the year?
Right.
So, those resources are needed to do this work.
Yeah.
So for people who may be new to town, maybe they've never heard of WRRC, what do you do?
Yeah, great question. And you're so right, because donations and giving, it's all year. We're supporting people 365 days a year, 24/7. We don't close, and it doesn't matter what's going on in the world. We have to continue moving forward in that way. And so the Women's Rural Resource Center has been here in Strathroy for over 30 years. And it is the only organization within this community, in this area, that does the work that we do. So also very, very profound. And so the biggest thing that I would say that we have, which oftentimes people think we only do, is we have an emergency shelter for women and children who have been impacted by things like intimate partner violence, domestic violence, elder abuse, the list goes on. What we call gender-based violence these days, which is an umbrella term for many of the things that fall within. And we're always full. We always have women and children from this community as well as from the surrounding area. We provide outreach in Park Hill and Glencoe and our surrounding rural communities to let people know that we're there. Another thing that we offer on our community side, which Brad was able to walk through with his wife and kind of get to know our team and meet them, and that's important to me, to open our doors and be transparent about what we do, where do donations go, what is our team focused on. And it comes down to a lot of what I was hearing you say today, and that good work that's being done. We have counseling, and that is for people from all walks of life, but oh man, the amount of people that come forward that just need a listening ear, or who need someone to understand them, or somewhere that's safe. When we live in rural and small communities, it's hard to have things that are for you, or maybe private, or in a way that you can really trust that that is going to be for you. And so we work very, very hard to ignite that confidentiality and privacy piece for women and families in our community. We'll see men will come forward, and we'll connect them to services that they may need. We might have someone looking for a congregation or somewhere where they can practice their faith or find that love in a community. We have a child and youth program that is funded by United Way, and it has been there for quite some time, and we support little ones with their big feelings when they've experienced or witnessed something that was harmful or hard to understand, because they are little and they're just trying to navigate the world. And so our children's program is profound. We have an Indigenous program for individuals who are wanting to access and get support through that way. We have a transitional housing and support worker, so that is someone who will go to court with individuals and advocate for them. She supports with housing, so we're constantly trying to keep people within their community, as well as whether it's from keeping them in their home or having them find new housing along the way. And this individual will walk alongside them right to meeting with the landlords and helping them find things for their home. And it is an ever-going job, like I said.
We can think about that, that job as, see if I can break this down.
Yep.
before the person even comes to your door,
Right.
you're doing work in the community to sort of set the table for response. In an emergency situation, you're responding rapidly when things are in that acute stage. As the crisis, continues, you're providing that counseling support for people as you're stabilizing and supporting. And then as they're ready to transition or trying to transition back in the world, you're providing that aftercare, that continuing care. And then back to how do we shape this community so that we don't have this need? It's like this circle.
And I was thinking about that when you were doing the children's worship, is to be in that way again, to really just see the world in that way, so beautiful and pure, right? And so I think about those who that age or younger or older that come into our shelter with their families and they're trying to understand. And it's harder around big times a year like Christmas and that sort of thing, where you're used to gathering, and we try and make this a home for individuals in our shelter because they have been displaced because of an injustice that they endured. So the woman and the child, they are the ones that had to uproot and flee and rebuild their life for something that had happened to them because of a lack of.
I think it's one of the longest conversations I had during the tour was with the counselor who serves children. And I don't know if I wasn't expecting to see that there, but I was very pleased to see that was there.
Yeah, very, very important work. That's one of our busiest programs, and just consistently. And we just partnered with the school board here in Strathroy for the summer to really get to, we're going to be holding camps and programs and that sort of thing to really get to the kids in our community.
A question I did not even think to ask. You've just named a partnership. Are there other formal partnerships that you have that? Yeah,
we work closely with the county itself, the Middlesex County. We work closely with the police here, as well as OPP, ANOVA, London Abused Women's Center. If we're having to really wrap around to support people who are coming from different communities. If we are going through something and we need additional support, we lean on our partners. So ANOVA, Changing Ways, where we're supporting men and families if they need. The Muslim Resource Center, we've done some work there, and it's really just like what you shared today about coming together regardless of, because we are all here walking this path.
One of the improvements I've seen in the last 20 years here, back in Sarnia, work that still needs to be done though, is once upon a time there were different doors into care, but those doors were siloed off from each other. And now I think the philosophy is whatever door you come in, it's an entry point into that wraparound service. And that's what I saw.
Yes, and that was what I saw growing up, that there wasn't that. There wasn't the opportunity or space for just anyone. We're even building groups right now for 55 and up, because we're like, as we're meeting people in community, you learn that people are sometimes processing the hurt they experienced from 20 years ago later in life because they're now understanding in a different way. And it's like they deserve space to talk and have community too. And that doesn't always mean counseling. It could mean women coming together to bead or thread or knit or whatever that looks like, because being together is anti-violence. It is taking that back and saying we can be well. I'm also an exec for the Engaging Men and Boys table. So that is where we come together to really advocate on behalf of men and to understand their part in this, but also that men aren't perpetrators, that men are human beings walking the earth as well.
That's a London-based conversation, isn't it?
It flows right into, so the Middlesex Rural Alliance has amalgamated with the London Coordinating Committee, so we come together to ensure the rural voices all throughout this area are highlighted when we're talking about bigger issues.
You're already talking about the next question. The scripture, one of the scripture passages, and then what we set up with the children's time is God's looking for justice. We sometimes only focus on, let's be loving people, let's be kind people, but what does justice look like? And so I'd be interested in your thoughts on, if not that scripture passage, but the general idea of what does it mean around here to create a level playing field, if I play with the children's time in our conversation here. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think, so it's interesting. It says, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And I think to walk with God, to walk with creation, is to walk with one another, because we are a reflection of that. We are a reflection of creation all around us. And to do justice, I think, is to really stand up and say that you, one, acknowledge what the justice is, but then how do I support in a way that is best for me, and not in a way where we need to scream it out loud that we've done that, but your own personal way on how you do that. So I think justice, I was reading, and when we talk about flooding and flowness of a river, if you think of a stream and you think about the boulders and the rocks and all the things that are throughout that, water flows around that. And so when I look at that stone in a flowing river, I think of that stone as the injustice, and the water is love, justice, humility, kindness, and those sorts of things. And it will continue to flow. And sometimes when we come together, it rushes over those stones and it wears them down and it softens those sharp edges, if that makes sense. And so I think when we look at justice, we have to do better at, and here in a community, being in Strathroy, one thing I recognize, so I've worked in the anti-human trafficking field for about 9 years now. So I've worked with individuals who've experienced sex trafficking and sexual violence. And I've also watched them come out of it and heal and are going to school and working and having families now, and it's incredible to watch. One thing that I hear survivors and individuals impacted by violence on a regular basis, including in Strathroy, is that they want to be able to say, this happened to me, and who will not judge me, but who will kind of walk beside me as opposed to behind or in front, who will walk beside me without judgment. So I think the no judgment piece that comes alongside justice is important to remember in creating space, and I think kindness is big, and to come from your ego into your heart.
Well, and let me add, the reason I picked this passage is because when we were corresponding, you were talking about how kindness and love, those virtues are so important to your service delivery model.
Yes.
Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, right down to the important part of when you look at policies that drive our services at the Women's Resource Center or what we're doing, do those policies reflect kindness? And so we've actually done a kindness review and assessment of our policies, for example, because while you have to remember that in somewhere there's power and differences all across the board. And so kindness allows us to come to a ground level and remember that we're humans having human experiences, and we all need something. And so kindness has really led everything. It leads everything. And sometimes kindness is not always going to feel good, because sometimes kindness is doing the hard thing. Sometimes kindness pushes you out into discomfort that allows you to grow. And I often will say to people, there's nice and there's kind. Nice is to often avoid conflict and to appease, where kindness is to really step into that, even if it feels unfamiliar or unseen or icky. And then it teaches you to love. It teaches you to be humble. And it reminds you where you really are in the grand scheme of things.
Being nice is also a way to get some distance from what can be a very demanding piece of work.
Yeah.
Kindness and putting one's heart out there can be so exhausting at times. And for your staff, I remember having a number of those conversations. Like, how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah.
So part of my concern for Women's Rural Resource Center, because part of the service delivery model requires some separation, for safety.
Yeah.
That a lot of the work happens without it being seen, and then that's where a lot of burnout can happen, because one can't talk about what you do sometimes. Yeah. And so that's one of my worries for you and your work.
Absolutely. We do so much on a regular basis, on a daily basis, that nobody knows about or sees, right? We are living with women. We are living with these families. So when we experience a loss in our shelter or hardship, or so much is going on and you're just a small team, it really does matter that we take care of ourselves. And as a leader, that is my job, to make sure that I'm creating an agency and space for my team to step back and put themselves first, because they have to be well for themselves and their families when they go home. The reminder that this is, yes, your calling or your job or where you want to be, but you have something else you have to take care of first, and that's you. And so really, truly making sure that we have opportunity for debriefing and spaces to acknowledge their faith and their culture, whatever that looks like, to my team, to create space for. And I think what you shared is such a beautiful thing to highlight, because our team do the things that they do not for someone to recognize, but they really truly work that job for themselves, and it lets them feel like they're providing such impact. And then when we're connecting with the police and all the people in this incredible community of Strathroy, you hear the impacts. We had a booth at the high school, and there was high school students that were telling us that they stayed in our shelter with their mom when they were little, and how mom is doing so well, right? And so this community has really supported one another. And so I think if you see someone coming from WRC, or you see a hoodie, you know, throw some kindness, because you don't know if they're staff or you don't know if they're a volunteer. You don't know if there's someone who's there getting service.
Well, let's continue in that direction, because the final question is, what can Strathroy in general, the community, and what can our congregation specifically do to support Women's Rural Resource Center?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. And of course, one of the bigger questions, and sometimes the uncomfortability with that, is the asking for money piece. That's never fun, but our programs, our services, so much runs off of donations. And we had someone stop by with a $100 donation, and it was like, I'm not sure this is gonna go far, but this was all I had. And it goes so far. It really, truly does. The cost of food is rising, and our budget lines don't increase because of who our funder is, or waiting for things to kind of match up. As you know, cost of living with what you're making, and those things need to align. And so I think monetary donations are one of those biggest things, and we're really looking for monthly donors. Even if that's your $20 a month that comes to us, that's so supportive. It helps individuals in their shelter. It also helps people who are seeing our food cupboard. I don't know if you knew, we have a community food bank Mondays and Thursdays that anyone in Strathroy can visit from 11 to 7. And we see people who are just, they both have jobs, or they're balancing, do I buy food for my family, or do I pay this bill? And so we're trying to ease that around. We have duty counsel that visits once a week to support those who are accessing court. We know there's not a health clinic in the area right now, so we have support with paramedics that come on site once a week to see the women or people in our community if they need to. Constantly trying to fill the gaps, and everything is supported and done by donations. It really does drive us. That's one of the biggest things. And the next thing would be, if we have an event or you have something, invite us. We would love to be a part of that, or show up and be reciprocal with community.
You brought with you some of your annual reports.
Yes.
And you'll be staying afterwards.
Yes.
During the cake that's downstairs, and then we're going out for lunch afterwards. But that means that you'll be available for people who want to ask you some more questions, talk about ways that you can support. And so on behalf of the congregation, I want to present you with a donation to Women's Rural Resource Center.
Thank you so much.
As an expression of our appreciation for the work that you do and for the time that you spent with us.
Thank you so much. And when we do things like this, we tell the whole organization, we let the women know, and they always love knowing that people are open to hearing about what we're doing, because that means that we're doing the justice of saying, hey, we're here, this is what we do, and we're really trying to take care of people in our community. And you never know who you're walking or sitting alongside who needs or has access to our services. And if you need support, call our line. That was one thing I forgot to mention. We have a 24/7 helpline. So it doesn't matter the time, anyone can call.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.